Mhm. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So, as a follow-up to our conversation last week, there was some interest in some of the documents that I discussed regarding some of the Zionist propaganda documents that, specifically Zionist propaganda documents with respect to propaganda that is delivered to Western audiences. So I kind of wanted to touch on some of those today. But before I begin, I wanted to start with a quote. Once I can find it. I don't want to take this out of context. So in 2011, President Obama addressed the troops at Fort Bragg, which is here in North Carolina. This was in wake of the US pullout of our troops in 2011. And in this address, towards the end, it was about half an hour long, I believe at the 28-minute mark, Barack Obama goes on to tell the troops that unlike the old empires, we don't make these sacrifices for territory or for resources. And by sacrifices, of course, he's talking about putting American lives in danger in a war that's not on our soil. Unlike the old empires, we don't make these sacrifices for territory or for resources. We do it because it's right. And there's a lot to unpack in that statement, but it's not a misstatement. If there's one thing that Barack Obama is known for, it's his eloquence and his choice of words. We can talk about the words specifically, but I'm more interested in how this was spun more than a decade ago, where unlike other empires, which is an admission that the United States is in fact an empire, we don't make these sacrifices where we send young American troops to other countries to die for a cause that they don't even understand. We don't send them because we want them to get territory or to get resources, excuse me, not oil. We don't want that. We do it because it's right, which is supposed to inspire confidence. But that's a pretty interesting thing to claim, considering that the pretext for us entering Iraq specifically, and by us I mean America, probably should avoid using that moving forward, considering the context. But the pretext for that was that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which we never found. I'm not saying the American government lied. I'm just saying these weapons of mass destruction were never found. But that is nowhere in this presentation from sitting president when we pulled out the troops the first time in 2011. So why did the US go to war? Not the reason that was given and not the reason that we speculate, but why did we go to war? Ultimately, we went to war because we wanted to. It was sold to us. And it was deliberate. There were specific choices of words that were made to cause the American population to believe that there was a just cause for this war. But of course, we all know George Bush doesn't have two brain cells to rub together. And he doesn't come up with these words that he sits in front of the camera and speaks. Other people come up with these words. Other people shop these words. They craft these words. And they're not just any words. These are words that have a singular purpose. They are to manufacture consent. Now, to define manufacturing consent, so this is a concept that Noam Chomsky turned into a book, actually. And the main idea, I'm just going to read off something that I wrote because he's Noam Chomsky and there's no way I'm going to deliver it as well as he would have. So in a nutshell, with regards to Western imperialism, the idea is that the government itself is not responsible for selling a concept like going to war for things that are not proven. That's the job of the media, right? Because when the government says something, we look at it with skepticism. But when everybody in the media says something, we say, you know what? If all the news is saying one thing, it must be true. The media is complicit in this because the media has its own interests. And sometimes, like in the case of the war at Iraq, those interests aligned with the interests of the government. Now, I don't know what those interests were, or I'm not going to say them, because I have my own speculations. But we were told ideas that turned out to be wrong. So we can surmise that the interests were not what we were told. But the concept remains the same. In order for us to go and invade another sovereign nation with claims that cannot be proven, we have to sell the idea to the population that is going to, for lack of a better way of explaining it, provide us with the sons and daughters who will go fight this war, and provide us with the votes and positive public opinion that will keep this war ongoing. This war lasted for a very long time. And selling it to the public in such a bipartisan way is not an easy thing to do. So, let's talk about some of the folks who were instrumental in crafting the terminology that was used to swindle millions and millions and millions of America into believing this outrageous lie. Thing that was never proven. The United States government doesn't lie. No. We also don't torture. It's enhanced interrogation. And that's an example of such terminology. The United States does not torture people. It only performs enhanced interrogation. Global warming used to be something that we discussed at length. But you won't hear the term global warming anymore. It's scary. It sounds like we're all in a toaster. No, now we call it climate change. It's a lot less scary when it's just changing. It's not warming. You're not being burnt to a crisp. Another really good one is the estate tax. Well, no, that wasn't how it was sold to us. The estate tax, of course, is a tax that millionaires, multimillionaires, people who have more than 12 million in heirs, after they die, they have to pay a tax from, I think, from 18% to 40% to the federal government. That's not you, that's people who have more than 12 million. Next year, it's going to be people who have more than 13.8 million. That, at that point, was called the death tax, because that's scary, and you should be against it. And those two terms specifically were crafted by a very intelligent gentleman known as Frank Luntz. Frank Luntz operated what we commonly call a think tank. He is a pollster. Maybe he was a pollster at this point. He had a stroke, and I don't think he does it anymore. But he was a pollster, and he was a person who got people together in a room, put a dial in front of them, and said, when I read off these words to you, don't say it out loud, just using the dial, tell me which one you like more or which one scares you more. And using that information is able to craft the perfect terms to use to describe something to the rest of American society. And I believe in his own words, more than 70% of Americans resonated with his ideas. Now, the reason I mention this individual specifically is because he also was selling another partnership. And that is the Israeli-American Bestest Buds, Biffles Forever partnership. That, in the words of Joe Biden, if there were no Israel, then America would have to invent an Israel. Those are his words, and he has reaffirmed this multiple times. But how do you sell something like that so well to a population that is separated from the rest of the world by 2 whole bodies of water, excuse me? Well, you gotta make it relatable. Why should an American care about what some random country in the Middle East that, a bunch of brown people live in? Like, why should he care about how bombs are dropped over there and whether or not his taxes or her taxes should go to pay for the destruction of? That's not their business. Oh, but it is. It is their business. And this is how it becomes their business. Of the 3 documents that I have that I was able to download, because there's a ton, but these are the ones that I was able to get from Frank himself. I think one that is really interesting, the titles of these, first of all, the first one that I really like is Communicating the Principles of Prevention and Protection in the War on Terror. Oh, that one's great. I'll just quickly read off a few bullet points just to kind of set it as a teaser. This isn't the one I'm going to talk about, but I just think it's cute. The bottom line on this one is, in his words, what matters most. It's important for newscasters, reporters, to really emphasize 9/11 changed everything. That's written down here. 9/11 changed everything. Is the context by which everything follows. No speech about Homeland Security or Iraq should begin without a reference to 9/11. Now, I might be taking crazy pills, and I might be gaslighting myself, but the last I checked, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. And yet, in the context by which everything follows, no speech about Homeland Security or Iraq should begin without a reference to 9/11. Strange. Number 2, the principles of prevention and protection still have universal support and should be addressed prior to talking about Iraq. Prevention and protection. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I don't know what we're preventing Iraq from doing, and I don't know what we're protecting ourselves from Iraq from. Well, we know what we were sold, which was something that we never found, which was weapons of mass destruction. But hey, I'm just a guy. I only know what the news tells me. Number 3, prevention at home can require aggressive action abroad. In other words, instead of me installing a ring alarm in my home, to be safe, I have to go to the neighborhood across the city, go into its house, and mass murder all of its residents because it's important for my safety, is what is said here, in other words. But America did it, so that means it's right. So this This quote, "Prevention at home can require aggressive action abroad, is the best way to link a principle the public supports with the policies of the administration. It's better to fight the war on terror on the streets of Baghdad than on the streets of New York or Washington." Four, quote, "Terrorism has no boundaries, and neither should the efforts to prevent it." Talk about how terrorism has taken the lives of the British, the Spanish, the Italians, the Germans, Israelis, innocents from all across the globe, historically innocents. Remind listeners that this is truly an international challenge. Quote, "Americans are not the only target. If it sounds like fear-mongering, understand. That's just you. You're gaslighting yourself. That's not fear-mongering. That's just selling good products. Let's just keep that in mind." Number 5. Remember, this is in the context of prevention and protection. "The world is a better place without Saddam Hussein. Enough said." The enough said part is not me. That's what's written in the pretext for this document. So this one is just a refresher memo. This was after Americans were fighting and were like, wait, hold on. What are we doing here? There ain't no bin Laden here. The American public started getting a little one eyebrow raisy. What is this? We were told that there's something here. No. Pipe down and remember that Saddam Hussein and Iraq are threats to the Spanish, the Germans, the Italians, the Israelis, and whoever else he said are victims. There is one document that I wanted to read, but I think it's not as interesting as the one that I, conveniently enough, stumbled upon a couple hours ago. The Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary. I touched on this one last week, but this one's over 100 pages, and I would not do it justice by trying to nitpick a few points from here. If you'd like to know what the highlights were, I recommend just Googling what I just said, the Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary. Now, this is not for redistribution, so I didn't tell you about that. I mean, but, you know, you have the freedom of Googling whatever you want, and I'm sure you'll have a great time reading through that one. And maybe, inshallah, I'll be able to touch on that at a later date. But there is one, the third one, that I think is just phenomenal. This one is called, and I have no idea how I never found this earlier because this is from 2003. This is from 20 years ago. This is the Wexner analysis, Israeli Communication Priorities, 2003. Let me read you the author's note before I go into this, because I think it's very illuminating. Now remember, this is the person who sold the American public the idea that global warming is not a thing, climate change is a thing, and that it's not the estate tax, it's the death tax. You shouldn't like that. Author's note, this is not a policy document. The document is strictly a communications manual. As with every memo we provide, we have used the same scientific methodology to isolate specific words, phrases, themes, and messages that will resonate with at least 70% of the American audience. Remember that 70% number that I mentioned earlier? It's from the man himself. There will certainly be some people, particularly those on the political left, who will oppose whatever words you use. But the language that follows in this document will help you secure support from a large majority of Americans. These recommendations are based on 2 dial test sessions, the dial test that I told you about, where instead of embarrassing yourself and raising your hand in a focus group, you just turn a dial so that you can have your racist views done anonymously. And these tests were done during the first 10 days of the Iraqi war for the Wexner Foundation. I'm going to read the conclusions that the gentleman himself has deemed as the essential ones. And I'm going to also provide his rationale for why these are the essential conclusions. The document is a rather long one because it is impossible to communicate all that is needed in simply 1-sentence sound bites. Yes, we have provided those, the 1-sentence sound bites, on the pages that follow, but we have taken the space here to explain why the language is so important and the context in which it needs to be used. If you only read 2 pages, these are the key conclusions. Now remember, this is a document that is meant, it's not a policy document. This is a document that's meant to instruct those who are acquiring the consent of the public to perform atrocities overseas. This is the document meant to train them on how to deliver these ideas to the American public. This is meant to let us consent to war crimes. Number 1, Iraq covers all. Pause. The title of this document is Israeli Communications Priorities. Israeli communication priorities. So the essential conclusion number 1, Iraq colors all. Saddam is your best defense, even if he is dead. My man is going to rise out of the grave with the weapons of mass destruction that they have been looking for and go specifically to Israel, is what Fox News is supposed to tell you. I can't make that make sense, but that's not my job. My job is to just explain to you how this is sold to us, how the propaganda is delivered to us. Number 2, stick to your message, but don't say it the same way twice. And I think the condescending footnote on this point is very illuminating. We have seen this in the past, but never so starkly as today. Americans are paying very close attention to international developments and are particularly sensitive to any kind of apparent dogma or canned presentations. In the document where you're preparing a nicely packaged communication instruction, you're pointing out the fact that Americans don't like that. But it works for 70% of Americans in your own words. Interesting. If they hear you repeating the exact same words over and over again, they will come to distrust your message. If your speakers can't find different way to express the same principles, keep them off the air. Meaning, don't make it obvious. Just don't make it obvious what we're doing, because otherwise the Americans won't trust these ideas too much. Number 3, it does not help when you compliment President Bush. I just wanted to add that one in there because it doesn't make any sense, but it's just hilarious because this is a document provided to right-wing media organizations. So don't compliment Bush. This is 2003. 2 years-ish after the war on terror was declared. So his poll numbers were great in 2001, 2003, let's not talk about it. I'm gonna skip to number 5 because the next one doesn't make any sense to me. Security sells. That's security, all caps, bolded with quotation marks. Sells. Security has become the key fundamental principle for all Americans. Security is the context by which you should explain the Israeli need for loan guarantees and military aid. I thought this is Iraq in 2003. Why are we talking about security and how it's important for loan guarantees for military aid for Israel? As well as why Israel can't give up land. Nope, I did not make that up. That is written right here. That's why you're supposed to sell to the American people in 2003 when you're still trying to sell this war, still trying to find those WMDs under all the couch cushions. You're talking about selling security for Americans by explaining the Israeli need for loan guarantees and military aid, as well as why Israel can't give up land. The settlements, meaning the illegal settlements in Palestine, are our Achilles heel. Look at that self-acknowledgement. For those that don't know the reference, Achilles' heel was really weak. He was super strong, but he took an arrow to the knee or to the heel, and he died. Similarly, the settlements are Israel's Achilles' heel. So the best response is that these help us with security. The settlements, where we encroach on land that is under international law, not ours to encroach on, we need that for security reasons. We just need to put people who shouldn't be there where they are because it helps Americans feel more secure. Israel is not on the same continent. It's not in the same hemisphere as us, but it's important for our security. The language in this document will work, but it will work best when it is accompanied with passion and compassion. And I can agree with this. I don't think it's really beneficial to go and to scream at newscasters, even if you're frustrated. So it's a good life advice in general. But it's strange to me that discussing demeanor is something that has a place in a document which is supposed to talk about facts. By the way, not once did I find WMDs mentioned so far. Wasn't that the whole reason we went over there? Okay, forget WMDs. Where was bin Laden mentioned here? 9/11 was mentioned, but bin Laden is nowhere in this document. Strange. The next one is just fun. Find yourself a good female spokesperson. That's not my take, that's his. Part of the communication of selling the need for Israeli security to the American population within the context of the Iraq War is using a good female spokesperson, because in all our testing, women were found to be more credible than men. And if the women have children, that's even better. I got nothing for that one. I have no snarky comment. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean, but the last I checked, if the facts and the truth are on your side, it should not matter who says it. But America doesn't lie, so we're gonna move on. Link Iraqi liberation with the plight of the Palestinian people. It is likely that the most effective arguments you have right now are those that link the right of the Iraqi people to live in freedom with the right of the Palestinian people to be governed by those who truly represent them. If you express your concern for the plight of the Palestinian people and how it is unfair, unjust, and immoral that they should be forced to accept leaders who steal and kill in their name, you will be building credibility for your support of the average Palestinians while undermining the credibility of their leadership. This is in 2003, 20 years ago, yet we have the Israeli ambassador of the UN going into the United Nations, I don't know what that room is called, where all the countries get together and talk about nothing, holding up signs saying, "Save Gaza from Hamas." So clearly the tactics are still valid, and someone has been doing his homework and reading, and that's good to see. It's good to see a well-read propagandist. But in case you're wondering where that psychotic behavior comes from, it's not from him. Again, some folks don't have more than a brain cell to rub against another. So they require somebody else to act as their puppeteer. And these documents are important for us to understand because for the past 20 years, man, for the past 100 years, I feel, even though I'm not that old, I feel like we all feel that old at some point, we felt like we were taking crazy pills. Why? Why are they saying these objectively untrue things? Why are they lying about our existence? Why is a fifth of the world's population being painted as the most monstrous individuals that have ever walked the earth by the one country on earth, the only country on earth who has ever dropped nukes on another country? Well, it's because people have interests. And I say people deliberately because corporations are people. Remember, corporations are people, they should not be taxed, and the only stocks that went up since the war in Ukraine, the first couple months, were the stock prices of the military, contracting companies, but that is just good marketing. And that's okay, and we should not complain about that. Yes, we have hyperinflation. Yes, gas jumped up to $7 at some point in some places of the States. Yes, we were supposed to have all of our student loans forgiven, but that somehow disappeared. But we're selling guns, baby. And that's all that matters. Why the American population, who also suffers from these decisions, why they make the choices that they make when they have to go vote for a lesser evil every 2 years or every 4 years, it's because there are folks who sit in rooms and come up with the most egregious way to describe something that in any other way of saying it would be disgusting. And they admit it in their own documents. It's important for us to read these things, because when we hear these things, we'll know that it's not coming from the person saying it. And then all we have to do is find out where it was written, have a good laugh about it, and if we do nothing else just to make sure that the American voter, who is a red-blooded American, loves his country, understands that there are certain people who are more than happy for sending him to go die for a cause that has nothing to do with their country. One of those things is the support for Zionism, which has objectively nothing to do with the security of the United States, at least as far as I can tell. We're given platitudes, we're given doublespeak, but we're not given real reasons. But at the very least, worst case scenario, somehow there is a good reason for all Americans to be on board with, mass ethnic cleansing of an indigenous population, and then telling you that it's a good thing, and that they're right to believe so. And best case scenario is that maybe Americans have the veil lifted just a little bit and understand that there is no such thing as American exceptionalism. That unlike the empires of old, America is not unlike the empires of old and is doing the things that it's doing, is sacrificing its American troops, its kids, that it goes to high schools and sells the idea of going to fight with a gun when you're 17 years old is a good thing. Maybe these empires just don't have your best interest at heart. And they are just like all the empires that came before. And they are not, in fact, doing things because they are right, but they are doing things because there are interested parties in seeing the fruits of their labor come and seeing their stock prices shoot up. I think that's all I have for this one. Are there any questions before we all go home? That is a great question. And in the Global Language Dictionary of 2009, that is a whole chapter. Let me find it. Oh. Okay. Oh. It's a very long document. Let me see. Oh, actually, I was wrong. It wasn't from his document where that's a whole chapter. It's from the We Stand with Israel, which is just a fact sheet, Jewishness, Zionism, and racism. Yeah, I can't read this whole thing without. I can't read this whole thing, but it's a very long one. But in a nutshell, the idea is Americans are in full agreement that anti-Semitism is a bad thing. And I think that, there was an incident in, was it Charlottesville? Where people were actually very anti-Semitic, but I could be wrong. I think they were also Trump supporters. I could be wrong on that city. I always get the name confused with Charleston, so maybe not all Americans. But because of the need to sell this idea that the only way people of Jewish descent can be safe is for them to all be sequestered in one small country that is the size of 1/5 of North Carolina in the middle of a bunch of other countries that probably wouldn't take too well to that. The only way that you can sell that idea is by conflating the concept of Zionism with Jewishness and therefore making the equivalence that if you are an anti-Zionist, if you're against settler colonialism, by default, you are against Jewish people. It's mainly, I think, a way to just shut people up about it because there's no real argument. I can't verify that because the talking points don't make any sense. But as far like, and to an extent, I think that it does exactly what's happening to me right now, where you don't know how to answer it, and specifically when someone is asked that, but is asked, "You are against Zionism. Why are you anti-Semitic?" Person's gonna sit there and just be like, "What? I don't hate Jews." But that's part of the framing. Instead of addressing the issues that are currently happening, and anti-Semitism is an issue, that is a problem. But anti-Semitism, that term was coined in Europe. That was a German term. Literally, that's where that term comes from, is from Germany. What does that have to do with Palestinians? Hmm. Yeah. I think it's important to just like, yeah, like it's, the thing is like, it is intended to derail the conversation. Right. And it's as old as the state itself. But the reality is Judaism, and by extension Jewish folk, have existed for thousands of years, but Zionism is a construct that, I mean, was only a thing in, depending on where you start counting, the late 1800s. So, yeah. Right. And it's like, okay, yeah, I do. Then what? اتحررت. Like, yeah, it's like, you know who else did? I'm pretty sure the PLO doesn't have any good things to say about them. How's that working out for them? I mean, someone I think who did a great job with really like explaining that is like, there is no Hamas in the West Bank. So why is the West Bank having issues? Why are there settlements there? There's no Hamas there. Yeah. He's a Marine, right? I think he was a Marine, Scott Ritter. It's because he has tunnels underneath his house, probably. Yeah. Yeah. Barakallah feek. Assalamu alaikum. All right, if there's no other questions, jazakumullah khair, and I hope it was beneficial. Assalamu alaikum.